Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara, and this month we read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong.
Chloe Gong is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the critically acclaimed Secret Shanghai novels, as well as the Flesh and False Gods trilogy. Her books have been published in over 20 countries and have been featured in the New York Times, People, Forbes, and more. She's a recent graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, where she double majored in English and international relations. She was born in Shanghai, but raised in Auckland, New Zealand. Chloe is now located in New York City, pretending to be a real adult. You want to tell us a little about the book itself?
So this was originally published on November 17th of 2020, and it's considered a fantasy historical fiction YA retelling. It is 449 pages and currently has a 3.91 on Goodreads, 4.7 on Barnes & Nobles, a 4.3 on Amazon, and a 4.1 on Audible. It has been nominated for the Goodreads Choice Award for the Young Adult Fantasy and Science Fiction in 2020, but has not won any awards as of this podcast recording. We think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. So for this book, there are main POC characters supporting LGBTQ plus characters and no characters with disabilities.
I feel like the appropriate Lauren summary initially would be, this is a YA retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in Shanghai in 1926. And then she'd mute her microphone and we'd laugh about it. But it just doesn't work as well when it's not Lauren. So I will read the back of the book. The year is 1926, and Shanghai hums to the tune of debauchery. A blood feud between two gangs runs the street red, leaving the city helpless in the grip of chaos, as the heart of it all is a 18-year-old Juliette Cai, a former flapper who has returned to assume her role as the proud heir of the Scarlet Gang, a network of criminals far above the law. Their only rivals in power are the White Flowers, who have fought the Scarlets for generations, and behind every move is their heir, Roma Montagov, Juliette's first love and first betrayal. But when gangsters on both sides show signs of instability, culminating in clawing their own throats out, the people start to whisper of a contagion, of a madness, of a monster in the shadows. As the deaths stack up, Juliette and Roma must set their guns and grudges aside and work together, for if they can't stop this mayhem, then there will be no city left for either of them to rule. Perfect for fans of The Last Magician and Descendant of the Crane, this heart-stopping debut is an imaginative Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai, with rival gangs and a monster in the depths of the Huangpu River. So, what did you think about These Violent Delights? And remember, no spoilers.
So I think I went into this book with too high of expectations. I enjoyed it overall, but it did leave me wanting for more. I just can't place what that is yet. I think it might have just been overhyped for me, and so then I kind of set the bar way too high, and it didn't quite reach that.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what you just said. I was super excited to read this book. I've been excited to read it since you told me about it and we bought the book, and it's been sitting on our shelf forever. And I was definitely, I don't want to say I was disappointed, because I didn't hate the book. It was still enjoyable, but it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. And I think like exactly what Barbara said. I think I had too high of expectations going into it, but I did still enjoy the book. I want to be clear on that. So we're not going to go into our individual ratings right now. As you know, got to wait till the end for that. But our group score for this book was a 7.13 out of 10. Would you recommend this book? So I think generally yes, especially if you're someone who enjoys Romeo and Juliet, because if you love that story, then I imagine reading different varieties of that same story would be entertaining for you. I think generally it's not a difficult book to recommend. My only caveat would be I did think that the book slowed down at times, to the point that there were definitely aspects, or not aspects, there were parts of the book where I had to like force myself to pick it up and read it. That's not always the case. So I probably wouldn't as readily recommend this as I may have other books on the podcast, but would absolutely recommend it to a Romeo and Juliet fan.
So I think if you enjoy retellings, you'll enjoy this book. I think the retelling aspect of the Romeo and Juliet part were really well done. With the fantasy aspect of it thrown in, I think that part was really cool of it. I still think it is a little overhyped, so I might go in and tell someone that just because of that, maybe so they can temper their expectations a little and not be. I'm not disappointed. I read it. I enjoyed the book. I just feel like I don't even remember where the hyping came from, Book Talk or just online in general.
You got it from somewhere because you were really excited about this when we got it at Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, I was. Not that I wasn't excited to read it and stuff like that. I still enjoyed it, and obviously I'm going to read the sequel. But
Right.
I don't know. I think that's the problem when people hype books up, then you're just kind of left wanting more.
That's the problem with hype in general. And I'm going to show my naivete asking you this question, but are there a lot of books like this? Like, is retellings like this, are those very common? Have you read a lot of them? I think this was my first one.
It's not your first one, but it depends on what retellings you're talking about.
Okay.
In general, retellings, there are a crap ton of retellings, and you've literally read like 2 that I can think of off the top of my head.
So enlighten me so that I can feel dumb publicly.
Cinder is a retelling,
okay, of course,
which is embarrassing for you. And the Spindle one that we read is a retelling as well.
So I guess totally fair point. I didn't think about fairy tales. I was thinking because this is I wouldn't consider Romeo and Juliet a fairy tale.
But it is. I mean, it's made up.
I guess that's true.
And it's fairy tale romance, even though people don't realize it's really not a romantic book whatsoever. But
as I'm sure Barbara will be talking a lot about later.
No, but I mean, so what other retellings are you asking about then, if not for fairy tales of like other?
Yeah, like other classic stories, like
sure,
because I consider
Songs of Achilles is literally about Achilles. That's a retelling. Okay. I mean, yes, Michael, there is a lot of retellings.
Fair enough. I'm gonna have to look into that because
there's a bunch of the Greek ones that are being currently redone or tellinged. I don't know.
Retold?
Well, sure, but like there's a ton of the Greek ones I've noticed that have been authors are kind of taking the original stories and kind of putting the spin on them. But like, I mean, is that a fairy tale? Because technically, Greek gods are fairy tales. But I don't know. I guess it depends on what you mean by that.
No, I mean that's fair. I appreciate the answer. That makes a lot of sense. I feel dumb that I didn't realize I had read 2 of them or didn't think about it. I guess. But.
I mean, they're fairy tales, I guess, and to your point. But I mean, they're still stories. Like Cinderella still was based off of a book, and like back then book. So
it's totally the same thing. It's just the way I was thinking about it. You're right. And Barbara loves Greek gods, so if any of you are listening right now and want to recommend one of those retellings, I'm sure she wouldn't mind. Anywho, for those of you leaving us at this point, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us. Make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram. In both places, our handle is at BadassLitPod. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a book you want us to read, let us know. Now, Barbara's going to read a short preview of our next episode. Next month, we are reading One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus.
Okay, preview is, pay close attention and you might solve this. On Monday afternoon, 5 students at Bayview High walk into detention. Brownwyn, is that how you say her name?
That's how I would have said it, yeah. Brownwyn.
Okay. Brownwyn, the brain, is yell-bound and never breaks a rule. Addie, the beauty, is the picture-perfect homecoming princess. Nate, the criminal, is already on probation for dealing. Cooper, the athlete, is the all-star baseball pitcher, and Simon, the outcast, is the creator of the Bayville High's notorious gossip app. Only Simon never makes it out of that classroom. Before the end of detention, Simon's dead, and according to investigators, his death wasn't an accident. On Monday, he died, but on Tuesday, he'd planned to post juicy reviews about all 4 of his high-profile classmates, which makes all 4 of them suspects in his murder. Or are they the perfect patsies for a killer who's still on the loose? What's a patsy?
It's like someone who's being framed.
Oh, I've never heard of that, but well, maybe is that like a 1950s term?
It's an old term, yeah.
Okay, because I feel like I've heard that in like Grease, the movie.
You probably have, or other older movies, yeah.
Okay, it's
not as commonly used anymore.
Okay. Anyways, everyone has secrets, right? What really matters is how far you would go to protect them.
Dun, dun, dun. I think this one sounds interesting. I'm excited to get into it.
It's another one that's been hyped, so I really hope I enjoy this and I don't get disappointed. Plus, there's a TV show. So
Temper
I've
your
been
expectations.
right. I know. But yeah, I'm excited for the TV show to watch it. But I also heard it just got canceled. So
Oh, womp womp.
yeah.
Remember, the second part of this episode is going to be an in-depth look at this book, These Violent Delights. So if you do want to read it, stop listening now and come back and listen to the rest when you're done.
Hello, everybody. I'm Megan.
And I'm Samantha.
With Literary Lushes.
And we want to tell you about our podcast. Join us every other week as we dive into a sci-fi or fantasy novel where we also drink cocktails inspired by the novel. We post YouTube videos of us making the cocktails.
And a lot of the times we even have the authors on, including Dennis E. Taylor, Marissa Myers, and even Angela Roque.
So join us because you don't want to miss the podcast that's been described as not taking ourselves too seriously.
And with that we say,
Stay lively with your libations.
My bulky blender was such a pain to use, I ended up hardly ever using it at all. But the BlendJet 2 portable blender makes blending so easy and convenient, I use it just about every day. BlendJet 2 is portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita at the beach. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. BlendJet 2 is whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. It lasts for 15 plus blends and recharges quickly via USB-C. Best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. With over 30 plus colors and patterns to choose from, there's a BlendJet 2 to complement just about any style. I rock the ruby metallic print myself because I'm clearly a certified badass. What are you waiting for? Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today, and be sure to use the promo code BADALitPod12. That's BADALitPod12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other portable blender on the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of the BlendJet 2. They guarantee you'll love it or your money back. Blend anytime, anywhere with the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to blendjet.com and use the code BADALitPod12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever. Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. Like always, we're going to start off by nominating who we think earned the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who was your nomination for this book?
This one was kind of hard to pick because I feel like there's a lot of characters that could fit this, but I would say overall it would be Juliette. Because I enjoyed how Chloe Gong made her into not like a damsel in distress type thing. Even though she really wasn't in her actual OG from Shakespeare, she was just...
True.
There was nothing distressing her except for maybe like not being with Romeo. But anyways, I just enjoyed this version of her a lot. So I guess that's my pick.
So I agree with you that I think there are a lot of choices in this one, but I also am going to nominate Juliette. I think that I really liked the way that, like you said, that she was a badass character, number one, which makes sense for the award. But also that, she... As far as like if we strip Romeo and Juliet from this and just look at her character, like she's this badass gangland, heir to the mafia crown, and she's both we see like her violent side and the way she handles things with violence, and we see her diplomatic side. And I thought the way Chloe Gong wrote her character, she really wove those two together really nicely, and it was cool to see. I feel like in a lot of mafia stuff that you read or mob stuff, you see the violence, but you don't see the other side of it. And so it was cool to see that in her character. And that's another reason why I am nominating her. And since we both nominated her, she gets the Badass Character Award.
Golf clap.
Golf clap. So let's talk about the characters a little bit before we get into the meatier discussion. I'll let you start with Juliette since we were just talking about her.
Sure. So like we've mentioned, I feel time and time again, Juliette Cai is the heir of the Scarlet Gang. She gets sent off to America a few times actually from her parents, and so she's not really in the thick of things, and she just in the start of the book she had just come back from America and is kind of trying to weave herself back into being the heir of the Scarlet Gang. It just so happens that she is a woman, so I feel like there's a little bit of talk about whether she actually will become the head of the house. Is that how you would call it? The head of the house?
Something like that.
So then I feel like she's kind of got a chip on her shoulder. I feel like that's how I read her, where she's trying to prove that she would be a really good leader regardless of her, gender.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, that's pretty much it. She's a, really, I mean, she murders people. So is she good at murdering? I guess, I'd say she's both skilled at, she's a bit of a hothead though. So I don't know about strategy. I mean, she's got a decent strategy up until her temper kind of runs with her. And that's kind of a theme in the book where she kind of loses her temper quite a bit. A few times she even is aware that she has that issue, but she's really close with her twin cousins, Rosalind and Kathleen. And then obviously she has history with Roma because Juliet and Romeo. So.
Right. No, and like you mentioned, I mean, her heritage was a big part of the story, I feel like, for her character too, because trying to prove to some of these people that she's like actually Chinese, and so many people actually looked at her and said, "Oh, that's an American girl. Like, you're an American girl now. You've been gone so long." And that was definitely like a interesting looking at her identity kind of being pulled both directions.
Yeah, because she definitely has, the American influence in the way she styles herself.
Mm-hmm.
With hair and makeup and outfits versus, what like Rosalind is, where she's very into the Chinese way of doing things. So.
Yeah. So next we'll talk about Roma. Roma is the Romeo of our story. He is the heir to the rival gang, the White Flowers. Like Barbara mentioned, he and Juliette have history. They were lovers back in the day before she got shipped off to America, and everything changed. You find out obviously along
when
the way.
Fire Nation attacked.
Exactly. I was hoping you.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
I know. I was expecting it to come in, and then you didn't say it, so I kept talking. But so you find out. I mean, there's a lot of betrayal and backstabbing and all sorts of fun things in their relationship. But as far as his character, he's the heir to the White Flowers, which is the alternate gang in Shanghai at this time. Would you say that they were like the smaller gang, right?
Well,
like
yes, because
the Scarlets were the
Scarlets were there first because clearly they're Chinese and the OGs there, and then the Roma and his family are the Russians who immigrated to China when Russia was having all those actual disputes in real life that actually happened, where they fled. I forgot who I don't know if it's a dictator, is that what? But the ruling person in Russia during that time, which was like years ago. So they kind of built their own little empire in Shanghai.
Yeah, that would have been so in the 20s. That would have been when they would have fled the Tsar. That would have been back when Russia was still pre-USSR, pre-Soviet Union.
Right.
Back in Anastasia times.
Right. I didn't want to call them a dictator because,
Yeah, I think it would have been. I mean, I can't remember the exact name of the political system, but it's closer to monarchy than dictatorship. Yeah.
Right, monarchy.
But yeah, I mean that's Roma. He's also a badass character in a lot of ways. He would have been a good nomination as well.
He's BFFs with Marshall and his cousin Benedict.
Yep.
I like their dynamic. Their friendship and stuff was really cool.
I did too. I thought that she wrote their relationship and the dialogue. Whenever you read a scene with the three of them in it, it felt very natural. It didn't feel like it was forced.
Like they're actually friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then he's got a little sister too, Alyssa.
Yes, I forgot about the little sister.
So she kind of plays
She plays a pivotal part, but she's a very minor character.
Well, I mean, we get a few of her little point of views and stuff like that. Like 3 chapters, I think, but
yeah, a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah. Right.
You want to talk about Marshall? Since you brought him up?
Marshall is a member of the White Flowers, and like I mentioned before, a close friend of Roma and Benedict. He lives with Benedict, and it's kind of described as he is Chinese, and he was orphaned. They don't really know how, and he just kind of fell into the White Flowers and just became a part of them. So he's actually, the only one that I know of that is not actually Russian that is in the White Flowers. He is kind of a punch first, ask questions, never kind of a guy. What else about him? He's the comic relief of the group. He's very funny and doesn't take anything too seriously. And they mention when he does, then they're like, oh, this is serious, because he's never serious about anything. And I really enjoyed reading his character and getting to know him better. I feel like there might be a little hint of a relationship between him and Benedict. So
I got that too. Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cute. But that's, I don't know, anything else for Marshall?
No, I think that you pretty much covered Marshall.
He's the one that gets poisoned in this fairy tale.
Yes,
not
yes,
Juliette. And I feel like I saw that one coming a mile away when, as soon as Juliette pocketed the sleeping drought potion and he was the one who saw it, I was like,
As you know, I did not see that coming a mile away and thought Juliette just freaking plugged Marshall in front of Roma.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I don't think that at all.
Like,
anyways, that's Marshall.
Jesus Christ. Anyway, Rosalind Lang is who I'm going to hop to. That's Juliette's cousin, member of the Scarlet Gang. She's one of the twins, like Barbara mentioned before. It was Rosalind and Kathleen, I think.
Technically Kathleen.
Yeah.
It's a persona.
Correct.
But
beyond that, I mean, she plays an important role in the story, and that she does a lot. Her and Kathleen do a lot of the legwork and investigation work for the Scarlet side of things when Juliette's trying to get information. Why are you looking at me like that?
Can you just repeat what you just said?
I said they did a lot of the investigative work.
Rosalind did crap for Juliette, actually. It's Kathleen that does all that for her.
Is it Kathleen? So I'm getting them confused then.
Oh my god. Rosalind is the dancer of the group.
She's right.
The dancer.
Yes, the celebrity.
Well, I don't know about celebrity. She's a dancer for their famous, what's that called? A club? I don't know what that type of a club is called.
I have no idea.
It's not a burlesque.
Boudoir?
Something like that.
Burlesque club, yeah.
Well, I mean, and she's kind of struggling with her identity and placement. Scarlet Gang of hers, and she actually isn't too. She's in the book, but not as much as Kathleen is.
Yeah.
Because I feel like she's pulling it away from Juliette.
So I was getting them confused talking about Kathleen. Kathleen did do a lot of investigative work.
She did, but we're not talking about Kathleen. We're talking about Rosalind. Rosalind is the one that saw the monster first and told Juliette about it, and kind of got like PTSD from it.
That was a well-written scene, I thought.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll talk about Kathleen, since Barbara covered Rosalind after I screwed up. So Kathleen is another cousin of Juliette, twin sister of Rosalind. She did do the investigative work, especially into the communists. They're kind of like the third group inside this setting that are competing for power. And Juliette sends her in to try to figure out, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was the leader, or one of the leaders of the communists in the city, and she wanted his home address, and Kathleen does a lot of work through that. And I thought that side story was actually really interesting. We saw her meeting up with like her contact and kind of getting, I don't know, it was a cool little spy story that took place inside the rest of the story. And
Kathleen
I really
does
enjoyed
the
that.
espionage for Juliette, and I really enjoyed reading her chapters.
Yeah.
So Kathleen isn't technically her name. She's actually Celia. Kathleen was Rosalind and Kathleen, the current Kathleen's older sister that passed away when they were sent off to France to study abroad. And Celia is her dad forces her to take the Kathleen name so she wouldn't, quote unquote, embarrass the family. So
I thought that whole thing was kind of odd that he had her do that. But
I mean, in that point of time, transitioning from a boy to a girl probably was like unheard of.
That's true.
So that's, he did,
I guess, what would have been more culturally.
I mean, I'm surprised that even then that he would have been that accepting, because I feel like back then, I mean, I don't know anything about Chinese culture as far as acceptance of LGBTQ plus people. So, but yeah, I thought that was kind of crappy of him to be like, well, I'm only going to accept you if you pretend to be Kathleen. It's like, what? Okay. So I'm very curious to know if we're going to get more of their backstory as far as Rosalind and Kathleen, because I really like them and Marshall and Benedict. I hope that we get more of them in the second book.
I'll let you start on Benedict.
Oh, sure. Apparently her other series it's the same characters, I guess.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, because I'm curious to know how that's going to work out. But anyways, Benedict is Roma's cousin and another member of the White Flowers. He is, I mean, yes, he's sensitive, but I feel like he's very analytical. Like, he is the brain to Marshall's brawn. You know, they're like each other's folly in the sense of they kind of complement each other, where Benedict overthinks things and Marshall just kind of jumps into things head first. He is an artist. Like, he's constantly drawing and painting and always trying to capture the perfect thing, and he just can't. I think he is secretly in love with Marshall, and he doesn't really like Juliette.
No, not at all. Or any of the Scarlets. He's
Well, no, but he especially doesn't like Juliette because he thinks that she's just gonna screw Roma over. So
Yeah.
curious to know how that it's gonna go with how the book ended and him believing that she killed Marshall. So
I really liked Benedict's character. I thought he and Marshall's their relationship was interesting to see. I hope that's explored more in the sequel. I also thought that the way that you saw Benedict's character, whether he was with his friends and the White Flowers versus like in a scenario with the communists or with the Scarlets, like he was very sensitive and like that what Barbara was saying when he was with his friends, but I would describe him as a loose cannon in confrontations that they had, because like he was one of the first ones that would yank his gun out, especially if Ty was there, the Tybalt of this story.
Mhm.
Like he definitely hates him a lot too.
Well, it's because he pointed his gun at Marshall, if I'm not mistaken, and I feel like with Benedict, he is going to protect him. I mean, he's in love with him, so like why that makes perfect sense for his character to, respond irrationally when someone's threatening the love of your life.
Some of those scenes when all the guns would come out, I had to like stop for a second because my brain would think about the 1999 Romeo and Juliet with Leo.
Oh,
they all have like the very flashy guns.
Yeah, that's funny.
Like, no, this is not this story. Gotta get that out of your heads. You can keep reading this. But I definitely thought about that almost every time there was a gunfight or a scenario where they were all like standoffing.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we'll move on to our questions. How did the book's setting in 1920s Shanghai enhance the overall reading experience? Did it effectively capture the atmosphere and cultural nuances of the time and place?
So I really enjoyed this setting. I love when books are set in different period types and not your stereotypical like European countries. I love learning about 1920s Shanghai as much as like I have no idea if it captured the atmosphere and cultural nuances, as I don't know much about that time period in Shanghai. But like from the little that like I Googled, it seemed like it did, and I freaking loved it. Like I really enjoyed the setting and the period as well. I think it was really interesting to read. I really enjoy that aspect, and I actually was finding myself wanting to learn more about it, and it was kind of nice that she included a little bit of that, actually, the history in the back of the book. So I loved it. I kind of wish she would have done even more with it, to be honest with you, because I really enjoy when the setting kind of feels like another character, and I feel like she was almost there with this. Like I just wished I wanted to learn more about it, but I think we'll probably like the thing of this is it's a duology, so I'm sure more of it will be seen in the second book. So I'm not going to obviously judge that too harshly for it.
So I also really enjoyed the setting. When Barbara told me about this book, I love like mafia and mob related stuff, and this being set in Shanghai was super interesting in the 1920s because that's like the same time period that the mob stuff was really big happening in America as well. And so I was very curious to read about that, and also I have no idea if it's realistic or accurate or anything because I don't know much about that period. I intend to do some more research on that because I'm curious, but the way that she wrote it, it was very interesting. I really liked the setting. I agree that it would have been nice to have a little bit more, but I hope that we'll get that in the next book. So as far as I know, I guess it captured the cultural nuances of that time and place, but I really enjoyed the setting. I thought it was a cool backdrop and one of the reasons I was excited about the book. Moving on from there, These Violent Delights is a retelling of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. How successful was the author in adapting the classic story into a new and unique narrative? Did it offer fresh insights or perspectives? I think so. I think that it was similar enough to the Shakespeare version that you could see the pieces, but Chloe Gong also changed enough to make it interesting. So it wasn't just Romeo and Juliet with a fresh coat of paint from Shanghai. And I liked that because I was a little bit worried. Like I was excited for the book up until I learned it was the Romeo and Juliet retelling, and I was worried that's what it was going to be. It was just literally the same story, beat for beat. And I'm glad it wasn't. I thought that the changes she made were meaningful, and really, really made it a different story. And I think that made it a lot better. But in the same token, I think that the homage she did pay to Shakespeare was appropriate. Like I think that the way that it was adapted gave proper credence to the classic story. It's not like she just took 2 or 3 pieces and ran with it. It was still very much there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed how it was adapted because I feel like Romeo and Juliet, it has been overdone.
What? No way.
Well, so it's just, I mean, it's a classic. So obviously everyone's going to redo it. Like not only in retellings, but just new ways of doing it, like plays versus movies versus different ways. And, they try to tweak it and stuff like that. And I feel like it's been a hot second since a Romeo and Juliet retelling or whatever you want to call it has been done where I actually enjoyed the changes that they made. This one, like Michael mentioned, like, yes, it has Romeo and Juliet-esque things about it. It's like, the blood feud between the families, the Juliet and Romeo characters, the star-crossed lovers aspect of it and stuff, and a little bit of the family dynamic as far as like, the cousins and that kind of roles that they play. But outside of that, like she really took it and made it her own. And I really enjoyed the fresh take that she made this into. I think it also, what I liked was just, the Romeo character was definitely more likable because I think Romeo is a piece of shit personally in the original.
Ooh,
and he's supposed to be written that. No, he's supposed to be written like this. And people are like, oh, Romeo is so romantic. He's not. He's not romantic. He's trash. And I feel like people missed the beat when Shakespeare was literally making fun of Romeo. But, this is neither here nor there. So she made him more likable for me. And I enjoyed this. I think this would be actually really cool to see maybe a limited series, maybe not I feel like nowadays it's like TV series are being made more instead of like movies. So, but I think this would be cool as a limited TV series. Like give me just 2 seasons to cover the first 2 books. Let's not make it into a Vampire Diaries thing where it's like 20 seasons. And I'm like, oh my God, just end already.
And not crazy either. Like 5 or 6 episodes. Like not
right.
Yeah,
like just enough to tell the story and stuff. I think it really has potential because I would love to see this visualized. The 1920s Shanghai, the dress, the atmosphere. Like I really would love to see that because I think that I enjoyed that aspect of it. So I think that would be a cool retelling instead of this crap that we keep getting.
Shots fired again. Let's see. The novel blends elements of fantasy, romance, and historical fiction. How well did these different genres blend together? Did one aspect overshadow the others, or did they complement each other effectively?
So I enjoyed the different genre blends and how they complemented each other. I really don't think there was one of too much aspect of it. Like I like fantasy, romance, and historical fiction. And so I feel like this was a nice little pie for me because I enjoy fantasy, but I don't want it all up in my face and just that being the only central focus. And this one really wasn't. Like it was intertwined with the fact that, Roma and Juliet had a history and that was in the past, and we get little snippets of what happened throughout the whole story. So it wasn't like this dump of information of what happened. And then we kind of see them like rekindling it. So I enjoyed that because it wasn't just like, oh, I'm in love with you, Romeo, like in the OG one. It went from friends to lovers to enemies to maybe lovers trope. And I love my little tropes like that. The fantasy aspect.
Again.
Huh?
To enemies again at the end.
Yes, for sure. And we'll see. But it hinted at enemies. But yep. I enjoy the fantasy blend of it. that I honestly, I feel like we needed more of that, because I feel like that part was maybe it rushed a little. It felt rushed to me, but once again, duology, and I feel like we're going to get a lot more of like the origins of this monster and how it's created, and because it was very mystery involved as far as like, you know, it's from this book and the book is gone and all this stuff. So I'm very interested with the monster / the creepy like bugs that was nasty as if, you know, like I really enjoy that. So I kind of want a little bit more, but I feel like once again we're going to get more of that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping in the second one. And then the historical fiction I already talked about, that like I loved the setting, I loved that aspect of it.
So I agree with a lot of what you said, actually. I thought I was going to have a unique point, and then you talked about the fantasy at the end there. So that I thought that they were well blended together. I liked that they were relatively even, at least from the romance and historical fiction standpoint. I was worried the romance was going to be more in your face. I thought it was kind of a side story, if you will, to the main part of the story. But it wasn't. If you're not someone who enjoys romance books, this book, I would not consider this a romance book. Like, there is romance in it, but it's not a romance book.
So just to make a note, I love books that have like it's fantasy or like some type of genre, and romance isn't like the main subplot to it, because it shows like the characters have crap to do, and the romance is like, I don't have time for you, but I have a little bit of time, but not all the times, you know. That's what I love.
More realistic. So in the historical fiction, I thought that, I mean, from what I know, they did a good job with that. I thought that the creation of Shanghai in the 1920s was really cool, like I said before. I also agree with Barbara that the fantasy, I think if I had to choose one that was overshadowed, it was the fantasy. Because the only like fantasy thing we really get in this book is the monster and the weird like
lice,
you know, right. Well, I mean, I would say like the Dr. Evil person who's concocted this whole plan. Like, that's the extent of the fantasy. And when you actually get that big reveal, I actually thought that was almost, I mean, it is fantasy, but it's almost more like science fiction, because it seemed like he was taking like a scientific approach to making this thing happen.
But isn't science fiction tends to be more like gadgets and stuff? Is that why it's considered, or like it takes part in like the stars? Oh, no,
not really. No, I mean, I would consider almost replacing fantasy with science fiction a little bit, just because it wasn't fantastical like magic or anything like that. It was like, I mean, the guy that the bad guy was a scientist. He created this, you know, this thing that we'll get into later. But
bad guy wasn't a scientist.
Yes, he was.
He was a kid.
He was using science.
No, he uses a fantasy novel like book to replicate the monster and the little creatures.
But it's described that he uses, like, it was a science thing that he used to create that, not cast a spell and there's
well, no, they're casting the spells, but kind of casting spells.
Yeah.
I think it was, but I don't know if I agree with you. Anyways.
We're splitting hairs there, maybe, but
lice-infested hairs.
I do think, like you said, that we'll get more of the fantasy science fiction element in the next book, because it's implied at the end that it's going to be a lot bigger part.
The worst is yet to come.
Pretty much. But yeah, that's just my opinion on those genres. The book features two main characters, Roma and Juliette, who come from rival gangs. How did their dynamic contribute to the story? Were their motivations and character development compelling? I mean, in a lot of ways, their dynamic is the story. But I thought that it was really well done in this case. I liked that they were friendly to one another, but were kind of still butting heads for most of the story, especially Juliette against him. What's the name of the trope that you always talk about? You just talked about it in the last question.
The lovers to rivals to lovers to rivals. Lovers probably again in the next book trope.
Okay. What she said. That was well done in this, to see the relationship kind of go back and forth, and also
enemies to lovers trope.
Enemies to lovers. There we go. And also get some flashbacks when they were reminiscing about like yonder times when they were young and in love. So, yeah, I mean, I thought that their dynamic did contribute to the story. I thought that the fact that it was set inside these two Chinese gangs was a really interesting part of the story as well. That the almost like you got like a West Side Story meets Romeo and Juliet vibe. And I agree. I agree. Yes, their motivations and character development was compelling. I thought that the way that she wrote all the characters was very compelling. I thought that the way that they were developed and the way that they grew throughout the story was very well done. I think that the scenes that you saw with both sides of the family, or both families rather, were really really compelling.
So yes, I obviously mentioned like I love the enemies to lovers trope, but this one's all over the place because like I mean, they were friends, then lovers, then enemies, then lovers, then maybe potentially enemies back. I enjoy their banter and how their history and story unraveled throughout the book. Yes, like what motivated them made sense. Obviously, Juliette was fighting for her place to actually be the heir of her respective Scarlet Gang, and she wanted to protect her people. She I feel like she cared even more than like her parents weren't really interested in the fact that the low lives of their gang were the ones that were getting murdered, and she actually was invested in them and wanted to stop this from happening, and actually genuinely cared for the other civilians of Shanghai as well. You can definitely tell that at the very end, where she's just trying to do everything in her power to try to get everyone out of the streets so they don't die. As far as character development, I feel like I didn't see a huge character development. I saw a little bit, but I feel they kind of like did it and then retrograded a little because I wasn't super happy with how easily Roma believed that Juliette betrayed him at the end. And like I get that like that's part of it, that they betray each other and all this other stuff. But it's like, bro, y'all were just saying how much you loved each other. And then all of a sudden, like, you believe that she would be doing that. Like, didn't he just say he would do everything in his power to, like, not hurt her? Like, clearly she's doing the same here because it's pretty obvious that her cousin was going to murder them had she not done this. So it's just, I don't know. That's a little part that I was a little upset with.
That's fair. I thought the same thing, that she was capable of that, though. So let's see. Chloe Gong explores themes of loyalty, power, and sacrifice in the novel. How well were these themes explored and developed? Did they resonate with you as a reader? So, I mean, yeah, I think those were the major themes of the book. Seeing loyalty, as far as loyalty from Juliette and Roma and their cousins to their respective families. Power is obviously the whole thing. The two gangs are fighting for power. That's the large overarching thing. And then within each of the families, there's struggle for who's going to get that power. And so, like with Juliette, it's her and her cousin Tai that are fighting over who's going to take over. And then with Roma, who was the other person in the Montagovs? But there was someone else on his side that was fighting for the power, and the White Flowers as well.
I mean, essentially, he was trying to take because Roma's father was like, "No, Roma, you're not the heir anymore. I'm going to replace you."
Pretty much. I think sacrifice was a lesser theme, but it was definitely part of it when we see, different things that they have to give up to do what they need to do. And one of those things, obviously, is their relationship. They feel like they have had to give that up multiple times because of their families and the expectations that are laid upon them. And so I think those themes were well explored and developed. I think that they did resonate with me well. I think that it was interesting to see how the author played those things all off each other and kind of intertwined those three themes, made for a really compelling story.
It was interesting to see Juliette reason with herself regarding, like, technically she was betraying the Scarlet Gang by teaming up with her family's rival, but, like, she did it to save them. Like, she's fiercely loyal to them, I would say more so than her parents, because they were just kind of like meh regarding the whole thing. The power dynamic in Shanghai was fun to read, and I wish we could have seen more of that, especially because it's the White Flowers, Scarlet Gang, and then you have the communist also kind of playing a role in coming into it and trying to put their footing in. And that was interesting to see how that was kind of shifting in the loyalty and power, because, the workers from both families, that were working in these factories and stuff at the end, like, were revolting against them to join the communists. So I thought that was interesting. As far as sacrifice, like, yeah, I mean, the characters made sacrifices. That's the whole reason why they're kind of being felt like betrayed, because, Roma's dad found out that he was in love with Juliette and said, kill her. And instead of killing her, he technically did betray her by telling him, like, where their people were. And so, like, they sent a bomb and killed all these people that Juliette really cared for. And Juliette kind of accidentally lets out where Roma's mom is, and she dies because of that. So it's like...
Well, it's not accidentally. She was pissed.
Well, I mean, it was accidental. She wasn't like, oh, go here and murder her. Like,
well, no, she didn't give that command, but she'd let them know where his mom was.
I know, but I'm not saying, like, accidental in the sense that, like, she wasn't like, hey, this is the plan, go kill her. That's what I meant. Like, unlike, I feel like Roma, where he was like, yeah, this is where you can bomb them. Like, he was, like, very strategic about that. Anyways, so that all those were interesting to see, and I'm sure that all of those things will, play a part in the second novel, especially like the power struggle between, like Michael mentioned, like the characters within the gangs, and to see who is actually going to be the heirs of the respective gangs.
No. The book incorporates elements of mystery and suspense. Did the pacing and plot twist keep you engaged throughout the story? Were there any surprises that stood out to you?
The pacing was okay. I feel like it struggled a little bit sometimes, but I enjoyed kind of just I enjoyed traversing Shanghai with the characters. And so while some people probably did enjoy that aspect of it, or like they wanted more of the go, murder here, solving issues here, that aspect of it, I really enjoyed when the characters breathed and we kind of got to see them just their daily lives and what was happening, and maybe the secondary plots and stuff like that we're building. I actually enjoyed that. So I didn't really have a huge issue with the pacing, but I can see where other people definitely would if that's stuff they don't enjoy. I don't need action for the sake of action, or like people dying or things happening for that to make me happy in reading a book. As far as the plot twists, I feel like it was a little obvious that Paul and his father were involved because they were the new people introduced in this thing, and I kind of figured Paul was somehow actually involved in this. I didn't think he was the actual, I don't know if you would call him the ringleader, but clearly he was the one controlling the monster and all that. So that was kind of interesting, but I figured he had some type of involvement, him and his family. So yeah, the plot twist that I did not see coming was literally at the very end, where, like we mentioned, this is just the beginning of what the hell Paul was planning. Mm-hmm. Like, are there more monsters that he had created? What is going to happen there? I was just curious to know how we were going to have a second book, because I've obviously wrapped up that part. So I was like, okay, something else is going to happen. I thought it was going to maybe do like more of the communist and that uprising, and maybe that subplot was going to be the forefront of the second book. But clearly the monster is going to be back as a different iteration of it.
I'm still hoping for some political subplot and being more on the front stage in the next book, but we shall see. Like I've said now, and Barbara mentioned before, the pacing was not great at times. I think that there were definitely parts of the book that were really slow and hard to read, and not because they're boring and there's not action happening or something like that, but just because I don't know, the pacing just wasn't there. I enjoyed the times that weren't action packed. There were some really well written sections, but there were also some sections that really felt like they dragged on. And when we're talking about a book where chapters are extremely long, that can be rough if an entire chapter is one of these slow spots. There were a lot of surprises that stood out to me. None of you were shocked by that, because I'm always surprised and never predict anything in these books, but except for obviously the Romeo and Juliet aspects. I think the biggest one was, it all happened at the end. I mean, it was that the monster was a guy that they had like forcibly mutated into this monster that spewed out bugs. And then the other was that, the same thing that Barbara mentioned, that you get this scene where Juliette puts down Paul and you think it's all over, and it's not. that was definitely a big like surprise. And if like the movie scene, like that's where the music would have picked up again right before the credits roll.
Creepy music creepifies.
Exactly.
Oh, were you, I guess you said you were a little shocked about like Marshall not being dead. Like I figured he wasn't dead. I
Yes.
thought that like I was like, oh yes, she's gonna use that little sleeping potion thingamajigger that she found on him, and he's actually not gonna be dead and he's gonna be just
No,
fine. And he was.
not me. I was like, holy shit, like this is how bad you want Roma to not like you again. They're just gonna freaking plug his cousin right in front of him. Man, I
Not
actually really
cousin.
didn't like
Not
Juliette
cousin.
for a
Marshall is
moment.
not his cousin.
That's right. Sorry, Marshall is the adopted one, not
I mean,
the cousin. Benedict is the cousin.
yes.
Yeah, I totally thought that she just plugged him right in front of him. I was like, wow, man, I really didn't like Juliette for a second, but
Yeah, no, I saw that one a mile away.
of course you did. Yeah. These Violent Delights touches upon social and political issues such as colonialism and nationalism. How effectively were these themes woven into the narrative, and did they provide meaningful commentary or depth to the story? I would really like to say yes to all of those, but I really don't think that they were woven into the narrative in a way that was. They were part of the backdrop. The fact that the communists were there and they were planning a revolution, and there's a lot of really interesting historical context that could have been used there to add more to the story, but I really felt like it was just a backdrop that was more there to remind us of the time and just to show that like this is a real city and like this is the stuff that's really going on in the background, but we didn't really get much more than that. I guess in that aspect, they were very well woven into the narrative because it made Shanghai feel like it was real at this time because it was. She used real historical events that were going on. I just wish there was a little bit more of that, which probably isn't shocking to Barbara or anybody else that's listening. I like the political stuff, and it would have been interesting to have more with the communists and seeing more about what was happening in Shanghai at that time. I do hope, at least, that in the sequel we get more of that, because if we don't get more of that, then it'll just confirm that she wasn't setting up this to be a future larger plot point, but that they really were just a backdrop for the story.
Interesting. I think it was woven in well because I feel like it was a secondary plot point that will be explored in the future books because of how it was. Because there's this doubt that, I mean, Juliette even mentions how these communists or even these other foreign nationals are coming into Shanghai and just taking over, and how she absolutely hates it, which is a little so I get where she's coming from, but I find it a little funny because like she definitely doesn't feel that way about the Russians, but it could also be because her whole life they've already been here, so she's not seeing them like come in and take over. Like it's just she grew up in this and this is what she knows. It's just her and the Russians, or like the Chinese and the Russians, but now we have like the French and the British coming over and trying to put their footing in, and she does not like that. So I found that kind of interesting. That's like, well, is it because you just like Roma and he is just who happens to be Russian, or is it just like I said, like if you grew up with them already there, that's all you know, then that's all you know. Whereas the other ones are like coming in and destroying stuff. Is like she's trying to save her gang from like these bug things killing her people, and her mom and dad are focused on the communist aspect. They're trying to gather them in and be like, oh sure, like we'll pat your back if you pat ours type thing, because they realize how important it is, because they are growing in their community and affecting them. And I think that's going to play a bigger role in the other book, because I'm hoping that she set that up, because that's how I've read that. So I feel like we're getting hints of it and of the discourse, because like in the last parts of the book, like you see how that's affecting it, where like I mentioned before, like they're rioting against these two gangs, and it's the political issues because of all this, and the societal issues where they're like, oh, these heirs and these rich folks and stuff like that, and they're not paying us what we want and livable wages and all this stuff, so like let's go against them. And so I feel like it's building there, and so I'm hoping, I do believe that we'll see more of that. So I think it was done well, because I like when it's not a dump of information, because unlike Michael, I don't like it when it's too much of that, because then I'm just really bored. And so this was like the right amount, because I could follow it. It made sense to me. It moved the plot along, and I feel like there will be more for the other book.
I hope I'm wrong, that it was just a backdrop and it's going to be. Oh, I was going to comment on something you said. You mentioned like you thought it was interesting that how she viewed the Russians versus how she views the people from the West that are there now. And I think that you're partially right in that she grew up and they were there and that's just how things were. But I think it's also they're viewed differently by the entire culture there as well, because the Russians were refugees. They were escaping persecution from the Tsar, whereas the French and the other Westerners they're colonizing. They're there to colonize and take over and, the whole like
That's
rape the
true.
lands and pillage. I mean, that's what they're there to do. And that's going to be a lot more negative attitude than,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, the showing up and destroying your city is not a
No,
fun,
being colonized is never a great thing.
probably not.
But
No.
I thought it provided meaningful commentary or depth to the story, especially because of how Juliette felt about it, especially because you could
I just
really
wanted
see it
more.
through her. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. The book introduces a diverse cast of characters. Did you find their representation and portrayal authentic and well-rounded? Were there any standout characters that you particularly enjoyed?
So I feel like I've already kind of touched base on this. Like, I actually did enjoy the main characters. I've never been a huge Romeo fan, and I enjoyed this iteration of him as Roma. I feel like he's a lot better. He's still not my favorite character, but I do enjoy him. Like I mentioned, I liked seeing his relationship with his two friends. I feel like that elevated him a little bit better. And then also his motivations towards Juliet. I enjoyed that. I really liked also his fierce love for his little sister. I feel like that was really a nice driving point for his character, really. I really liked Juliet and her relationship with her two cousins as well, especially with Kathleen. I really like to see it. So I'm curious to know how that's going to go in the second book. I hope there's no falling out between them. I feel like there might be. And that scares me because I actually really enjoyed their relationship. I'm curious to know how Rosalind's going to play into it, because I feel like she wasn't really present in this book, but I feel like she might have a bigger presence in the future book. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I really like the secondary characters. I feel like they weren't just there just to be there and move the plot along or like help the characters along. I feel like they had backgrounds and motivations and their own little story arcs and stuff. I'm curious to know more about Marshall's background, since I think he's the one that we get the least amount of. Like, we just, like I said, mentioned earlier, he's an orphan and he just kind of was there, and it's like, interesting. Like, is he maybe a secret Kai? Is he, like, I'm very curious to know about like what's going to be the twist here, because I feel like there's going to be one, but I could be completely totally wrong. But yeah, I'm very curious about that. But yeah, overall, I really enjoy the characters. I feel like I enjoyed the book more for the characters than the overall plot. Just like the plot was maybe a little lacking for me, just in the sense that like I wanted more of this creepy creature and all that stuff. I would like to point out, though, that has nothing to do with the characters, but that just the scenes when people were ripping their throats out is like chef's kiss, man. I'm surprised this is YA. I mean,
Right?
there's not like it's kind of hard because it's not like she was going in depth of like all this stuff, but like she kind of was going in depth with all this stuff,
She
like
definitely
we
was.
mentioned like
I
their
remember asking you when I got to the
yeah,
first
like,
throat
is this
ripping scene.
YA?
I came to the other side of the house and I found you, and I was like, "Is this a YA book? Are you sure this is a YA
Like,
book?" Like, it was
she
super
was
violent.
not lying when she called these violent delights, because this book is violent, man. Like, and just killings overall. Like, there's no qualms in them. Like, people getting shot and murdered in this book, and I enjoyed that. Like, even those like the little henchmen and stuff. Like, I really enjoyed that aspect of that part. Like, I don't get squeamish. I enjoy that stuff. So well done.
I enjoyed it. I just wasn't expecting it in a YA book, but it was well done. I agree. I liked all the characters too. I don't have a lot to add from what Barbara said. I think that the characters really made this story. I agree that there really weren't any side characters that were just there to push the plot forward, which is always a negative in my book too. As far as their authenticity to like the time period and historical accuracy and those kinds of things, I feel like I can't speak to that, but I have read a lot of praise for this book that does praise the authenticity that Chloe Gong and the history that she must have done to make this a realistic 1920s Shanghai. So I'm going to defer to them since they have more knowledge than I do. As far as standout characters I particularly enjoyed, I think that Chloe Gong did a really good job making an ensemble cast, and I liked all of them. And I feel like saying that feels like a cop out, but I really did. I liked all the characters, all of the ones that we discussed, even the lesser characters, the more minor characters. I really liked too.
Like the doctor.
Yeah, like the doctor.
He was interesting. I liked him and his little beard gushing.
Juliette was probably my favorite character of the story. But I also really enjoyed, like I mentioned before, the relationship between Roma and Marshall and Benedict, kind of the boys. That was an enjoyable dynamic to read.
Juliette was really, I liked her because she's not a likable person. I liked that she had all these flaws, and honestly, at the end of the book, she was still so vastly flawed. Like, I feel like she learned nothing. It's like, oh, my little gray character. Like, I enjoyed that she was murderous, and she wasn't this perfect little person. She definitely has some growing up to do.
That and I like to do quickly in book 2.
I enjoy that because I feel like sometimes like authors make their characters like these perfect people. I'm like, okay, this is not realistic. Like, people aren't these perfect humans. Like, they make mistakes and they're supposed to be growing from it. And you can see, like, when she pretty much almost gives up at the end, like, how much that was devastating to her, that she murdered this guy for no reason. Like, when she did it, she's like, yes, I'm going to do it because you're killing my people. You're killing the people here. And as soon as she realized that she'd been played, which was, like, hella obvious, but it's fine, she was super regretful. And, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, it's taken a toll on me and all this stuff. And it was really interesting to see that, like, her actually break down, because before then she was just this hardened character who's like, nah, like, I'm tough as nails and all this stuff. And I was like, no, you have a marshmallow inside.
Well, speaking of the ending, let's talk about the ending. Did it leave you satisfied and eager for a sequel, or were there loose ends you wish were tied up? I liked the ending. I thought it was a good cliffhanger. The whole scene where she puts down the guy and then finds the note that says Paul.
Just a very white name. Just think Paul.
Just puts down Paul and thinks this is over. I've protected my city and my family and my friends, and then finds the note that says, upon my death, release them all. And it's like, oh my God, how many are there? Like, there's just this one poor old man that was turned into a monster in this town. That was actually kind of a sad scene, by the way, if we're talking about the ending. It really was. Where he was like she described the way he was looking at her was like, please kill me. Please kill me. And that was really sad. But yeah, I loved the ending. I thought it was great. I'm excited to see how many monsters there are, and what Paul's grand machination, and how all the moving parts put together in book 2.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed the ending. I feel like I was satisfied because it tied up aspects of the book, but then there was like 30 bajillion more to be answered. Like, we got, we know who done it. We got that answered and this, but it's like, we're just skimming the surface of this, like, plot of what the heck is going on here, So I feel like it gave us enough and then put enough out there for it to be like, okay, I definitely need to read the sequel for this. It's not one of those where, like, it's a self-contained story. So it's like, you definitely need to read the second one to see what happens. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. Especially how like Michael mentioned it, like the N-word, the poor dude, like you felt that, and I was so happy when she murdered Paul because he was an asshole.
He was,
and
he was in love with her, Barbara. He loved her.
When Juliette got that note, like Michael mentioned, like you can see that in your mind's eye of like the music ramping up, and then it just fades, or not even fades, just literally cuts to black, and you're like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going to happen? Like, are we talking monsters? Or are we talking more little lice infestations? Are we talking both? Like, is it going to be even worse than the OG one? Like, what the heck did Paul do? So, well done.
We shall see. And we have made it to the end of another episode where we talk about our individual scores. Barbara, what did you give These Violent Delights?
I gave it a 7.25, Michael's favorite.
Gosh, damn decimals.
I just feel like it was good. I enjoyed it. I needed to give that 0.25 going off of the other books that I've read,
Fair enough. I gave it a 7. No decimals. Because it was good. I did like it. On a scale of 10, I could give it a 3 on Goodreads, but it didn't feel appropriate to give it a 6. Like that just felt too low, so I bumped it up to a 7, which, as you know, made our group score a 7.13 out of 10. Make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they allow you to. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Our username on Instagram and Facebook is at BadassLitPod.
Have feedback about today's episode? You can contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on Instagram or Facebook.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara. Bye.
Bye. See you next time.
So I enjoyed their banter. Oh, it's my turn.
I was literally about to unmute and say she finally stopped, and then I heard it through my headset.
Oh boy. Anyways, it's like she knows. It's like, why aren't you at Dad's when he's not talking? My God, Luna.